baseball fans across the world. My name is Simon, and I would like to welcome you to the Extra Innings podcast, where the MLB is the topic of discussion and opinions are at an all-time high. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the Spotify page with the links down below in the description. Now, let's play ball. How's everybody doing today? Hope you are staying safe. Today on the Extra Innings podcast, we will be discussing whether players like Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa, and Mark McGwire, who all played in the steroid era, should be inducted into the Hall of Fame or should they be left off the ballot. Today I have a special guest with me, Adam. I appreciate you coming on. It means a lot, taking time out of your day.
Happy to do it.
First and foremost, I'm going to give you the stage. Take all the time you need. Just shout out everything you want to go for. Where can everyone find you?
Sure. Well, I am the founder of Romantic About Baseball, which is a blog at romanticaboutbaseball.com. You can find us on Twitter, RMNTC Baseball. I founded that. I'm a contributing writer for Baseball Almanac and Call to the Pen. I also just published my first book, which is Baseball for Kids, a young fans guide to the history of the game, which is available on Amazon, IndieBound, Barnes and Noble, anywhere you get your books. So that's my backstory there.
Perfect. So once again, all those links will be in the top of the description. Definitely go check out his book. I actually did know about that before you came on the show because I did look at your Twitter and I found that. I think that's actually something really cool, just to have that type of background, to especially baseball for kids, to just try to bring a new generation of fans into the league and into the the fandom of baseball, with them knowing everything about it and like the major history points that are needed to be known when you come into the league.
Sure. Yeah, it's important. It's a game that's not always accessible to everybody, depending on where you live, and so the mission was to kind of, bring more awareness to it. So yeah, I appreciate that.
100%. So today's episode, like I said, we'll be talking about the steroid era. And this is a very controversial topic around the league, with guys like Barry Bonds still on the ballot. But we will talk about him specifically later in the episode. But I just want to get your take on steroids in general and the time that is the steroid era.
So I've usually call it the thread that pulls the sweater. The thing that you have to understand with steroids is that when they sort of rose to prominence, nobody was actually doing anything illegal. The famous incident where a St. Louis beat writer finds the bottle of androstenedione in Mark McGwire's locker. You could buy it over the counter at a pharmacy. And so there's that layer to it where there technically a lot of players at the time weren't doing anything that was expressly forbidden. So you start there. Then you go a layer deeper and you think it's so difficult and or bordering on impossible to actually prove the extent of it. There's not a way to trace it back. You can't look at it the same way you look at, say, gambling. You can't look at it the same way you look at, other eras in the game. There's no patient zero. So if you can't trace it and you can't really prove who was using and who wasn't, you're kind of defeating your own case. So I think when I look back at the steroid era, being I was born in 1986, so my first really vivid memories of baseball come from the early to mid to the peak of the steroid era, and it was so you take all of that into account, and then you think of how important the steroid era was for the game. You go back to the home run derby, the great home run chase in 1998 was essential for the game. It was just coming off the strike. There was a huge amount of anger and resentment among fans. It was necessary for that to happen to bring it back, to the forefront. So I don't look at it the same way as a lot of other people. You know, a lot of more. I don't like to use this term all the time, but more conservative based writers where um, I think it was a necessary thing. I don't know. I don't endorse steroid use by any means, but it was absolutely necessary for the game to have that era.
100%. I agree with you in the fact that the steroid era at the time, now looking back on it, we can see that it probably wasn't the right thing to do because steroids do enhance. They are player performance enhancing drugs, but at that time, it kind of was the norm. So there was no, it wasn't a said rule that it wasn't said that everybody uses steroids, but it was pretty much inference based on just the way the shape was going in. And my take on steroids is while steroids can help you hit a ball further, a guy like Barry Bonds per se, if he's hitting a 450-foot home run without steroids, it'll be a 480 to 500-foot home run with steroids. The ball is still going to leave the park either way. The steroids don't help him with his hand-eye coordination. It doesn't help him hit the actual baseball, which is the hardest part of the sport, is hitting a circular object with another circular object. So
Right.
my thing on steroids is, yes, I don't, like you said, don't condone it, and is looked down upon in today's game, but back then it was the norm that was just happening throughout the entire league. Even players who weren't hitting 40, 50 home runs a year were still on steroids. So I
Well,
think,
you have to contextualize it, right? I mean, you could say steroids, like you said, it's the norm of the time. Well, it was also the norm of the time to, that colored representation wasn't a thing in the game. Some of the best players never got to play in the major leagues.
sure,
Imagine if we get a Josh Gibson on the Pirates, or you get, Cool Papa Bell on the Yankees, or then the Highlanders. It changes. You can go back to any era and you can say Babe Ruth never pitched, never played against colored ball players, against African Americans, against Hispanics. They were all banned from playing. So he never played against the truly best talent.
that's the best. Yeah,
Like you can go back to gambling. Well, how much did gambling really influence things? You can go back to cocaine use in the 80s. Tim Raines used to slide head first so he wouldn't break the cocaine vial in his back pocket. So, I agree with you. It's one thing to penalize people for saying performance enhancing drugs, right? But it's another thing to say, that it wasn't that different when you look back on it.
100%. So, and just a quick thing on that gambling point.
Mm.
Uh, this isn't really about steroids, but what's your a quick opinion on Pete Rose?
No chance.
No chance.
No chance. There has to be a line in the sand. There has to baseball, and I've written about this somewhat extensively. Like I've read both of his books, and the thing is, it's clear that he gambled. It's clear that he gambled in ways that affected games that he was immediately involved in, that he had influence over.
Yeah,
It's clear that he lied about it for a long time. You have to have a line in the sand, a sort of sacrificial lamb, to preserve the integrity of the game. You have to be able to say, this is where the line is. This is where you can't cross. If you do this thing, you have to set that precedent. I mean, you can go back to pictures of ballparks at the turn of the century, and right across in big letters it says no gambling. So, I mean, this isn't news. This wasn't like steroids where we sort of caught up to the problem. This was well established, and he still not only defied it, he lied about it. So yeah, absolutely zero chance he gets in my personal opinion. Zero votes.
so I agree with you that he shouldn't get in, but I do believe that Rob Manfred will eventually allow him to get reinstated back into the ballot, and I think he will make the ballot because if you look at him as a player, um, I think he's too influential as a player to not make it. But I agree with you in the sense that he shouldn't, based off, forget about morals. Just it, like you said, it was a precedent that was set, and it's not like a, like you said, in the steroids, it wasn't an like, yeah, you shouldn't have done it, but it was the norm. Gambling was completely frowned upon in the league, and he still did it and lied about it. So I agree with you that he shouldn't, but my personal opinion is that he will.
Sure, that's quite a rabbit hole to go down, but yes, I respectfully disagree. I think as we get more analytically minded in the baseball writers BBWAA, I say we like I'm in it, I'm not, but as it gets more analytically minded and we start to peel back the layers of those stats that people cite from Pete Rose, it gets a little less impressive the further down you go. And so I think ultimately, I respectfully disagree, but it wouldn't shock me if he did. Put it that way.
I got you. So first person I really want to talk about is, some people really consider him the best player to ever play baseball.
Uh-huh.
He's not there for me quite yet. He's definitely up there, but he's not there for me as the best player to play baseball. Barry Bonds. I'm gonna quickly read off his stats, and then I just want to hear. I'm sure you have a lot of research on Barry Bonds and just know a lot about him. You've actually probably seen him play.
I do.
So I'm gonna read the quick stats. His wins above replacement is 162.8. He had 9,847 at bats with 2,935 hits, a 298 batting average, a 444 on base, a 607 slugging, a 1,051 OPS. He had 1,996 RBIs with 762 home runs and 514 stolen bases. So, with all that being said, what is your take on the player that Barry Bonds was, and his chances of him still being on the ballot?
So those are two different answers, because the answer is that Barry Bonds is undoubtedly the best player to ever play the game. I'll take it a step further. So it was clear when in about 2000 2001 was very clearly the point where Barry Bonds, I think it was 2001, when he showed up to camp clearly disproportionately bigger. Okay, so let's just say, all right, let's just go from 1986 to 1999. All right, that's clearly pre steroids Barry Bonds.
Yeah.
All right, so 289 batting average, 412 on base percentage, 567 slugging percentage. If you add that up, well, let me back up. So you get that. That's what they call, the triple slash: 289, 412, 567. 494 home runs, 471 stolen bases. You know how many other players have done that in the history of the game?
None.
That's a flat zero.
Yeah.
He has over 1,547. He has 1,547 walks to 1,189 strikeouts. 3 MVPs, 8 Gold Gloves, and of that 103, of that 162 wins above replacement, 103 of them were accrued before the start of the 2000 season. So if you figure, if we're, even if I meet everyone halfway, all right, and say, all right, take out all the stats after 2000, go ahead. He goes from undisputedly the best baseball player of all time to arguably the best baseball player of all time. So I think the argument against Bonds is almost contrarian, because it's just, at that point, he's so undeniably influential. If you watched Barry Bonds, and I don't know how old you are, but if you ever watched Barry Bonds play and you watched a game where Barry Bonds was, Jim Passon, a guy that my partner on
Yeah.
the Romantic About Baseball podcast, posted probably one of the more enlightening stats. When in games he didn't get a hit, all right, so his batting average is 0, his slugging percentage is 0. He's still got on base over 40% of the time.
Yeah.
So you figure that this is the all-time leader in intentional walks. Nobody would touch him in terms of that record unless they figure out how to stop pitching to Trout. He's undoubtedly the best player in the history of the game. So I just don't see how you can cut it off at the knees. You can do whatever you want to his stats. He's still the best. I just don't see how we can continually deny that. And he deserves a spot in the hall.
100% too. Because if you think about what the Hall of Fame represents, it's the best of the best, and to leave, like you said, either undisputably or arguably the best baseball player to ever step foot on this earth, out of that, you know, like out of the Hall of Fame, it's just it shows that the Hall doesn't represent the best of the best, because the best of the best is still not in the league. It's still not in the Hall of Fame. I think he should have been a first ballot, and I think he would have been unanimous if if this whole steroid, like you said, if you cut it off at the knees and cut it off, you say you literally take every stat after the 2000 season and throw it out the window. He's still up there as one of, if not the best all-time baseball players. So I don't know how the voters still don't vote him in. Like, he was close, but like, just he should be 100%. I don't see how he's not 100%. He should have been the first unanimous player to ever get in. Um, but that goes to
Well,
Mariano.
the voting's done by writers, and he had a
Yeah,
notoriously nasty attitude towards writers. The Hall of Fame, a lot of people go with this attitude that the Hall of Fame should be the best of the best. The reality is the Hall of Fame is not. If it was really the best of the best, Jack Morris would not have been inducted. Harold Baines would not even be in the conversation. The fact is that the Hall of Fame it's more of a time capsule. It's more of the most important players, because you look at, say, Jack Morris, who I think extremely lowly of. He sort of brought about the clutch postseason pitcher, because everybody remembers 1991 Game 7. There's it's important players. It's not necessarily the best players, and Barry Bonds not being in only further validates that thinking.
100%. And like you said, but even with saying it's a time capsule, Barry Bonds still has to be there in my like,
He has
because
to be. I agree with that.
just so forget about his stats, forget about him being the best player to ever play. He is so influentially important to the game of baseball and the history of baseball. Like, the steroid era is a part of baseball history, and there's legacies built in during that era. Bonds built it before that era, during that era, and after. So I don't know, and I think the writers, and something that I don't love with the Hall of Fame voting. I don't think fans should be allowed to vote. Don't get me wrong, because if fans were allowed to vote, Derek Jeter would have been a unanimous vote. Even though, if you look at his actual stats, he shouldn't have been even one vote away. He should have been further down. And I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate for that, because Derek Jeter is a fan favorite. And don't get me wrong, he was a great person off the field and a very talented player. But he is not a unanimous or even one vote shy of unanimous Hall of Famer. And I will stick with that opinion forever, because if you look at his advanced stats, it's just not there. But the thing that I wanted to talk about is voters, not voters, well, voters who are writers tend to be slightly biased, and I think you have to. It's going to be
Slightly.
hard to do. You have to, yeah, they're very spiteful. You have to kind of throw your ego out the window when you're voting for these type of players, because it is such an important, to get inducted into the Hall of Fame. It's a very important milestone in someone's in a major leagues in a major league baseball player's career. In talking about Cooperstown, but in an athlete's career in general, just to get inducted into your sports Hall of Fame. So the fact that he's not in there just really blows my mind.
Well, and that's a thing that, there's a lot of self-aggrandizing when it comes to voting for the Hall of Fame. Like, you look at the guys, if you really want a trip down memory lane, and again, it depends on when your formative years of baseball was. Go down the list of guys who couldn't even make the 5% on their first ballot. Okay, so you look at guys like Lou Whitaker, who had a higher wins above replacement than Derek Jeter. You look at guys like Kenny Lofton, who the only guy that stole more bases in the 90s was Ricky Henderson. You look at a lot of players down the list. Kevin Brown, a very unlikable guy, clearly a steroid user,
Yeah,
but
100%.
also was one of the most dominant pitchers of his era. Um, so when you go down that list, you do see the bias in writing. Dan Shaughnessy from the Boston Globe is voted just one. You get 10 players to vote for on a ballot. He's
Voted for
voted.
one.
He voted for one last year and this year.
It's just ridiculous.
Right. So that's really what it boils down to. You have to go back. If you really want a fun trip, just look down the list since 1991 when they cut the rule off, or it's 1980, I'm sorry, where you had to get the 5%, and just look at the incredible players. Johan Santana, guys that couldn't even make it past the first ballot.
Yeah, I mean, especially
So
bringing up that
that's
name.
that you want the bias there.
Bringing up that name, Yohan Santana, is actually because I'm from New York and I've seen him pitch. I want to say at least 20 to 30 times live in my life.
Mhm.
What he was electric out there. I know his better years were in Minnesota, probably, but he had some very very solid years, and of course he had that. Um, I want to say no hitter, but the
There was
ball
no
that
hit.
the ball that Beltran hit should have been fair ball because it did bring up the chalk, but there was no replay back then. So I'm gonna give it. Obviously, it's a no hitter in the record books, but that should have been counted as a hit because that definitely hit the chalk. But like I said, Johan should be in. You mentioned Kenny Lofton, one of my favorite players. I actually so my first involvement in like baseball was 2005 because I was born in 2001.
Mhm.
But I've watched countless Barry Bonds games. I've watched guys like Lou Gehrig just in the past, and watching like old film of them. I don't know how they would fare in today's game, but Barry Bonds would definitely fare extremely well. But they were so electric in their days. Like I loved Kenny Lofton. Just you mentioned his name, and all memories came back of me watching him.
Yeah.
Dude is amazing. Like the fact that he didn't get 5%. I
Yeah,
don't know. I don't know where the
it
writers' heads are.
Yeah, it's well, you have to look back. For example, in 2013, when Kenny Lofton's first year on the ballot, when he got removed, that was the peak of when steroid users started hitting the ballot. Um, I believe that was Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens' first year on the Hall of Fame ballot in the same year. And you're still in the thick of guys like Rafael Palmeiro and guys like that. So context has a lot to do with why players don't do as well. And Lofton was just a victim of circumstance, really. There.
Yeah, he just got unlucky with the timing that he happened to get on the ballot.
Correct.
But next, I want to talk about Mark McGwire, who
Hmm.
once again another face of the steroid era.
Yes.
Um, in his career, he had a 62.2 wins above replacement. He had 1,626 hits, batting 263 with a 394 base percentage, a 588 slugging, and a 982 OPS, with 583 home runs and 1,414 RBIs. What's your take on Mark McGwire?
So McGuire's a slightly isn't as open and shut because if you remove the if you remove the steroid moniker, okay, you've got a guy who, he did hit a lot of home runs. He's also a first baseman, a power hitting first baseman. What he did is not unreplicatable. And that's what separates Bonds from a lot of these other cases for me is that what McGuire did while um excuse me what McGuire did while it is prolific, it's really a outstanding. He's an outstanding home run hitter. The problem that you're going to run into here is that what McGuire did, that's all he did. For just one of the weirdest stat lines. When I say the triple slash, the batting average, on base percentage, and slugging percentage. In 2001, his final season, I think he was 43. He was his batting average was 187. He got on base at 316, and then he slugged almost 500 that year. So you figure that this is a guy who he plays a position that is not defensively demanding in comparison to others. So you can't use that, right? Um, he gets walked a lot. Well, of course he gets walked a lot because he hits a lot of home runs and he hits a lot of home runs.
That's
Players
pretty
of
much
that
it.
players like that bring that one feature to the table, you had better be prolifically, amazingly, historically good at this one thing. Do it so it's unreplicatable to really get a to be immortalized that way. Because what the last thing you want is to say, okay, this guy gets in the Hall of Fame, and then like 3 or 4 years later, all the records he put up are antiquated. So
100%.
McGuire is, while he is, I don't penalize him for steroids because I don't think what he did was wrong. I don't think what he did was illegal. Because again, when Androstene Dione was completely legal when he was using it, and he stopped. Ultimately, I still don't think he gets in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, Mark McGuire is. I mean, being a Cardinal fan, it's hard for me to say I don't. I want him. It's hard for me to say he doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. But I have to agree with you in the sense when you bring up those points like irreplicatable stats. Yes, don't get me wrong. If you look at these stats as a whole, do they deserve? Are they Hall of Fame stats? Yes, they are. But if you look at the way his career kind of progressed through time, that triple slash stat line that you brought up is unreal because if you think about it, he either walked, hit a home run, or got out.
Right.
Like
They call it the three true outcomes.
there's no singles, there's no doubles, there's no he didn't. The only reason his on base percentage was in the 300s because he walked most of the time. Um,
Right. He got
so
56 hits that year, and 29 of them were home runs.
it's yeah. So when you see how his career progressed, sure, he the way he went about things with when he got caught, he stopped using it. He went about it the right way, but I feel that I don't think he will. I don't think he will get in. I don't think he. I just don't think it's. I don't think. I think he got unlucky with the cards that were given to him. Don't get me wrong. He had an amazing major league career, but with the way things panned out, I don't think he gets in.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think he gets the support he needs.
Exactly, and it sucks to say because watching him is if you actually watch him like during his prime, he's electric. The ball flew off
Right.
his bat, and you kind of lost track of where it went because it went so far. But yeah, it's tough to say because I am a Cardinal fan, but I do agree with you that he's just not gonna get it. So the next person I want to talk about, who actually is kind of linked to Mark McGuire in a sense because they had that race, is Sammy Sosa.
Mhm.
His career stats: 58.6 win above replacement. He had 2,408 hits with a 273 batting average, a 344 on base, a 534 slugging with an 878 OPS. He had 1,667 RBIs with 609 home runs and 234 stolen bases. Go for it.
I think I lost your audio here.
Um, so I'm gonna go. I'm gonna take the first stab at it. I personally believe that Sosa, looking at these stats, should be in the Hall of Fame.
Mhm.
Um, I like Sosa. I like Sosa's chances more than I like McGuire's chances because first of all, if you just look at the stats, he was a better player than Mark McGuire, like pretty much overall, except pretty much on base percentage. But like we said, Mark McGuire did walk a lot, and so did Sammy Sosa. But I think Mark McGuire had just more. He had a little more fear in pitchers. But also, you're looking at stolen bases, 234 versus 12. McGuire is not a threat on the base paths. Sammy Sosa is, and like you said, defensive positions are a major, um, just a major uh, determination on where they play. So Mark McGuire playing first, not the biggest deal, and then playing DH. Sammy Sosa playing in the outfield is a much bigger ordeal.
So the thing about Sammy Sosa is that it wasn't so much It wasn't even so much his time because during the home run chase, because he was a perfect sort of foil to McGuire. McGuire was a very quiet, reserved sort of guy, almost seemed a little uncomfortable with the attention, whereas Sosa just seemed to drink it up. Sosa was very, very much enjoyed the whole, the being in the center of attention. And he was a perfect person to have in that moment, but he's a lot like McGuire. He just contributed virtually nothing else offensively or defensively. He's not a hall. If you take the home runs away, he's not a Hall of Fame player, and that's what it boils down to for
But
me.
now that the home runs are there,
Well, yeah, the home runs are there, and they are. He is there. It's a really high number,
yeah,
but I just, when you look at, and this is the argument I make with a lot of these types of players. In order to get to that Hall of Fame criteria, you either have to do it on such a prodigious and historic level, or contribute something else. And Sosa just didn't. He didn't. He didn't. He didn't. He doesn't strike me as a player that brought a complete enough game to it. I'm welcome to be wrong on this, but I don't. He doesn't. He doesn't. It doesn't make a case for me.
I don't think you will be wrong because I don't think he will get inducted ever. Because, like you said, a lot of these players are one-dimensional, in the sense that they're not an amazing defender, or they're not, they hit for power, but their average is not quite where it needs to be considered a multi-dimensional player. So I don't think you will be wrong. I just don't see it happening. But if it were between McGuire and Sosa, I would pick Sosa over McGuire.
I'd agree with that.
So I want to do one more quick hitter because if you look at Manny Ramirez's stats over his career, they do jump out to you in certain aspects. You have a 69.3 win above replacement player with a 312 batting average, a 411 on base, a 585 slugging with a 996 OPS, with 1,831 RBIs, 555 home runs, and 38 stolen bases. The one thing that jumps out to me there is the batting average being above 300. What do you think about Manny Ramirez as a player and his chances?
Chances near zero.
Yeah.
As a player, this is as a player. You put it to you this way: if you break out his career over, again, I go back to defense. I'm a sucker for a good glove. He's easily the worst of all of these candidates we've talked about. He actually never put up any season in his career with a defensive wins above replacement above zero. See, you talk about players who, yeah, I mean, he had some big moments, and he was a great hitter, but again, when you talk about him, is there anything he did that hasn't been replicated or couldn't be replicated again? And I don't see anything on that list that makes me think, oh, well, he needs to get into forget the fact. I'm willing to forgive the terrible defense. I'm willing to forgive the awful base running. I'm willing to forgive those other two aspects of the game because he was so good at this other thing. But you look down that list. I mean, two of the guys we just talked about hit more home runs, than Manny Ramirez. You talk about, yeah, he was over a 300 hitter. Okay, that's good. That's he's worthy of a conversation. But do I think he gets in? I don't see it.
Yeah, I agree. The only reason I wanted to bring him up is because he did have that above 300 batting average.
Sure.
I don't. I agree with you. It doesn't. His defense alone, watching him play defense was
He was
interesting.
lost.
It was interesting to say the least because a player of his caliber just looking so. It just looked so like either unorganized or just like you said, lost out there. It was weird to see that a player that's he like such a good offensive hitter and such an influential player to just forget. Like sometimes it looked like he really didn't know how to play the outfield. Like just straight
Yeah,
out didn't know how to play. Like it wasn't his natural. It wasn't his natural position. I still don't know if it was his natural position. I don't know where you put him on the field because but
yeah, it
outfield
was a
definitely
waste
wasn't
of
it.
time. Waste of time to put him in the outfield.
I feel like I don't know. He just didn't look good out there ever. Like he made one play here and there, but it was just abysmal to watch,
Yeah,
especially watching it back. It was bad.
yeah,
But that was the only reason I wanted to bring him up is because he did have one thing that the other players didn't have. Obviously, Barry Bonds did have that pretty much 300 average, but like guys like McGuire and Sosa were pretty far off. So that's why I wanted to bring him up. Get your thoughts
sure.
on it.
Yeah.
But the last guy I want to talk about in this whole era is a pitcher actually, Roger Clemens.
Hmm.
Uh, quick stats on him: 139.2 win above replacement player. He was 354 and 184. He had a 3.12 ERA. He had a 1.173 WHIP, 4,672 strikeouts in 4,916 and 2/3 innings pitched. He started 707 games. What are your thoughts on Roger Clemens?
So Roger Clemens, a lot of people put Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens in the same sort of class, and on some level you could do that, but there's something about Barry Bonds accomplishments. Okay, Barry Bonds only led the league in home runs off the top of my head, maybe twice in his whole career. Um, Roger Clemens won the pitching triple crown twice. Okay. He won 7 Cy Young Awards. He won 7 ERA titles. He pitched over 200 innings in a season at ages 40, 41, and 42. Um, the thing that I have with Clemens is that there's such a freak show sort of level of accomplishment here that with Bonds there was there I guess I should say with Bonds it's you but you would believe it without the steroids. Like we talked about earlier, you cut it off at the knees, he's a Hall of Famer. And you can clearly say, okay, this is pre and post, PEDs of this player. With Clemens, you don't really know. You can't really tell, because the stats are so outlandish over such a long period of time that I just don't see. Statistically, yes, if you just go off the numbers, he has to be in the Hall of Fame. But I would say that I would probably vote for him, but it would be a more unwilling vote, just because it's so clear. Like it's such a freak show level of accomplishment. It's so clear to me. He struck out 20 batters in a game 10 years apart. These are things that are not physically capable of being done by a human body without some sort of enhancement to such a freakish point that I
Yeah.
just don't, you know what I mean? It's hard to define, it's hard to describe, but I would just simply say that my vote, if I'm voting with my head, yes, I would vote for Roger Clemens. With my heart, I know it contradicts my whole thing of like, oh well, yeah, I know it contradicts my argument, but there's something very for lack of a better term, there's something very very weird and very dirty feeling about Clemens and what he did and how he did it.
100%. I think him being a pitcher might. I don't think it contradicts your statement only because a hitter has multiple facets of a game, and so does a pitcher. But I really do believe that what Roger Clemens did was not physically possible, like humanly possible. Okay, I don't know if people can comprehend how many batters 20 strikeouts is in a game, like how astronomical of a feat that is. There's 27 outs in a baseball game. To strike out 20 of 27 is when it happens, you're like it's so rare to see. Pitchers sometimes don't have like like no, eight. If a pitcher in today's time strikes out 8 batters in a game, he had a really good outing strikeouts wise, and if he continued that throughout the year, he's gonna probably average around 200 strikeouts. To get 20 strikeouts in a game, 10 years apart from each other, is so unreal that I have to believe that it wasn't him doing it. Of course, it was him. Wrong use of words, but there was something else there other than just him. I don't think. I think the PEDs, when it comes to a pitcher, um, play a different role than when it comes to a hitter. Um,
Well,
and like you said, he was an innings eater throughout his entire career. He's pitching over 200 innings throughout his 40s. Um,
Well,
so
think about this. The add to this accomplishment, okay? His rookie year was 1984. Okay, there's a stat called ERA plus. Are you familiar with this statistic?
yes, I am.
Okay, so for those who aren't, 100 ERA plus is considered average. Anything above 100 is you are that much percentage better than the average pitcher. Walter Johnson, Jacob DeGrom, these are guys who are like, they pitch in the 200s. Okay. So a 200 ERA plus would be like 2018 Jacob DeGrom. Roger Clemens put a 200 ERA plus season, 200 or more, in 1990, in 1997, and then in 2005.
It's 21 years after.
He led the league in ERA plus in 1986, 1990, 1991, 1992, 1997, 1998, and 2005. So we're talking about 3 decades where he was anywhere from 70 to 126% better than every other pitcher in the game. It's almost like there's no way you can believe it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no physical explanation to it other than the use of steroids because a human being's body cannot go through the wear and tear, especially as a major league pitcher. Your arm can't go through that for 20 plus years, and then in your 21st season have a 200 ERA plus. Like it just, I can't. I don't think there's a way to explain it. The guy wasn't in. Yeah, he was in good shape, obviously because he's an athlete, but he wasn't like this peak athletic shape when he was in his 40s. So there's no way to explain it, and it's not like every other pitcher in the league sucked that year. He was the best pitcher at 40, 41 years old, whatever it was.
Right.
It's got to be steroids. It just has to be.
Think of it this way: if you know someone everyone knows someone who is a bad driver, right? And maybe they were like, you're a bad driver when you're young, but as you get older, you become a better driver. There's a distinct point where it's like, okay, well, you were always a bad driver, but now you're a terrible driver. Roger Clemens was an awful driver from day one and just never changed.
Yeah.
And so that's, maybe not the best analogy, but
It gets the point across.
Yeah, the gist of it is that I don't think Roger Clemens will get in the Hall of Fame. Do I think he deserves it is a much more complicated. To me, he's more complicated than Bonds by a pretty noticeable stretch.
Yeah, and like you said, stats alone, how can you not? But everything into account, I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, there will never be the thing you can safely say, there will never be another Roger Clemens
Oh no.
in the game. So, again, it becomes at that point where you can compromise with me on Bonds. We can go round and round and say, okay, well, you can slice it any way you want. Bonds gets in. You can't do that with Clemens' career. It is such an outlier from the day he starts to the day he ends. It's such an outlier that there's no way to properly classify it. So I think that's what makes it so skeptical. Like if you're going to get caught cheating, at least be subtle about it. He's like the guy in class. Somebody's whispering answers to Barry
He's
Bonds.
yelling out loud.
Roger Clemens has a bullhorn. Trying to get the answer.
And I really just don't think he cared.
No, he did. Well, it's clear he didn't. It's clear he didn't, and that's the thing is he didn't, and he was consistently not caring. So to me, I think it's much we're constantly talking about what we should do with Bonds. I think Clemens is a much harder answer, uh, much harder question to answer.
And yeah, I agree with you. I really don't think any of these players get in. The players that I think should get in are Barry Bonds, um, either Sammy Sosa or Mark McGwire. If you have to pick one or the other, I pick Sammy Sosa, and stats alone, Roger Clemens. But knowing that's not,
I think Bonds gets in. I think Clemens is close, but I ultimately think Bonds gets in.
I really,
The rest
I
will.
I think Bonds gets in, but it really depends on writers from year to year change their opinion on the steroid era. Some like there's years where Bonds is extremely close, and then there's years where he'll drop off like 5%. So it really depends on how they're feeling when the voting comes.
Yeah, I think as the BBWAA as the demographic gets younger and more analytically minded, and not as attached to the pre-steroid era, I think you'll. I think ultimately we'll see Bonds. We'll see. I think we'll see Bonds get in next year.
I really hope so because it just it's still it's not. I can't. I obviously I can see why, but you just like you said, take away all those stats. He's still one of the one of the best players to ever step foot on this earth. So just a quick wrap up.
Well, I
If
will
you
say
had
this: the must see TV will be now that the 2020 ceremony has been pushed to 2021. You want to see? I want to see Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens get in and have to share the stage with Derek Jeter at his. You want to talk about must see television? Watch the reaction when Barry Bonds goes to give his speech and Derek Jeter goes to give his.
I never got your I just quickly before we wrap up,
Mhm.
what is so like I gave my opinion on who on the player I believe Derek Jeter is. Like I said, I believe he was an extraordinary human being, and what he did for the game was otherworldly. Um, but what do you see him as a player? Do you think a lot of I'm like almost everyone was upset at that one writer who didn't vote him in? Would you have voted him in as unanimous Hall of Famer?
Well, unanimous, I don't know. I mean, he's a no-brainer Hall of Famer.
Oh, 100%.
What I don't necessarily, not to dodge the question, but I don't really care about the unanimous stuff. I mean, I think he's a no-brainer Hall of Famer. Unanimous or not, I mean, I get why people would want him to be unanimous. He was arguably the most important player in baseball from, during the 2000s. So I would say, if I'm to answer the question, yes, I would, but not because he was that much better. It was because he was that much more important.
Got it. So, just one sentence, your view on the steroid era.
Necessary evil.
Perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. So once again, I appreciate you coming on. It means a lot taking the time, especially late at night. I know you got a busy schedule going on, but just one more time, take the stage, tell people where they can find you, and it'll all be in the description down below.
Sure. The website is romanticaboutbaseball.com. The Twitter handle is at RMNTC Baseball. My book is Baseball for Kids, a young fan's guide to the history of the game, and it is currently available. If you've got any 9 to 12 year olds, or 7 year olds, or anything like that, it's made for them. So that's where you can find me.
And guys, I highly suggest it. A time like now, you're home, you can't really go out. Pick up the book, get it for your child, and sometimes, honestly, you can get it not even for a child, for someone who really is just a beginner in the sport of baseball. If you're just getting the hang of it and you're just coming into the community that is the baseball community, pick up the book. It has um, the key points in MLB history that aren't needed to be known if you want to contribute to like a baseball debate. So thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me. Once again, Adam, thank you for coming on. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Castbox, YouTube, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Um, I appreciate you guys.
I should probably,
iHeartRadio.
I'm sorry. I should probably mention my podcast is also there. um, and we also have a Romantic About Baseball podcast on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts and all that. We host writers and guests and things like that.
Perfect. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.